Hi there, I'm James Conlon, and welcome back to Coffee with Conlon. You've maybe heard some of the others. Here's my coffee cup, my nice Mexican coffee cup, and I hope you have one by your side. This is a special week. We're going to be talking about the Ring of the Nibelungen of Richard Wagner. Why? Because we are broadcasting the entire Ring on Saturday, July the 25th, and then it will be archived after that, so that you get a chance to hear it more than once or catch the whole thing, as will be this coffee talk. You'll be able to catch that too after the fact. So I have a list of questions here. They're written up, and I will start with, when did you first hear Wagner? What did you think, and how and if that has changed? So I started hearing Wagner's music by radio and recordings, I would say, by the time I was 14 or 15. So I grew up in New York City, and we had the classical music station of the time, WQXR, and we had, of course, the Metropolitan Opera broadcasts every Saturday. By the time I was, I think, 15 or 16, I had been able to start attending Wagner performances, and it took no time at all for it to ignite a passion that has, frankly, never expired. So has that changed? No, not at all. In fact, it's often said that Wagner is not just contagious, but that if you are stricken by it, you are stricken for life. And that is that the love and fascination that this composer holds doesn't seem to exhaust itself. That's my experience now. A long time after my initial contact, I did, of course, conduct a certain amount of his music in concert, but I started actually conducting the operas because I had the first opportunity to do so in my early 40s, in my years as music director of the Cologne Opera. And to be blunt, it was the big calling card. I remember when I was approached, did I want to come to the opera company? I said, yes, but I want to be able to conduct Wagner because I've been very frustrated until now, not having had the opportunity. And the answer came back, we're a German opera company. That's what we do. And so, as Christopher Koch mentioned, that was a great calling card of why I was so eager to arrive at Los Angeles Opera. And of course, since that time, I've done so many things that, of course, I've grown to love the company in all regards, not just the Wagnerian regards. Now, here's a question from John Wellborn, who says he looks forward to hearing the recordings of the superb production he remembers enjoyed live under my baton 10 years ago. Thank you, John. Do you agree with the choice of adjective in describing Richard Wagner's Ring cycle as infamous? I suggest that the word intended is, or should have been, famous. Sure, there is controversy about the composer, but the four-opera masterwork is famous, not infamous. Your thoughts? Well, John, thank you for that important question and difficult question to answer and a difficult question to live with. How much of Wagner's failings, moral failings as a human being, should we take into consideration when performing his music? And of course, I'm specifically referring to his abhorrent antisemitism. So I would start by saying, whereas it's impossible to completely ignore, well, in fact, I don't propose ignoring it. I propose saying plainly and openly that this man was anti-Semitic, and that is a condemnable fault, and it should not be forgotten. So I don't suggest sweeping it under the carpet. As a performer, our mandate, our obligation is to present a piece of music as it is, if you like, warts and all. I think it's our job to present it in its fullness as best we understand it, and to attempt to move an audience with its work, not necessarily agreeing with the composer, but simply presenting the composer for others to judge and for others to have their own reaction. Now, as a musician, I feel that pure music, absolute music, and all of its elements cannot have an ideology. They don't. A C major chord does not have an ideology. A polyrhythm, a piece of counterpoint, does not have a political viewpoint. It is not possible for a harmonic progression to be racist or inherently generous. These are attributes that we, these are characteristics that we perhaps attribute to the music after the fact, but we participate in that attribution. Music, for me, is first and foremost a non-political, non-ideological art form. Is the artist? No, not necessarily. Some artists are, some artists aren't. Wagner was full of opinions, and not just his anti-Semitism, but on many other subjects. He was a revolutionary in his way. He wrote copiously prose works, which you can agree with, disagree with, condemn, admire, agree with, disagree with. That's all fair enough. But I don't think one can refer to the Ring as infamous, because it's not the Ring that's infamous. If anything is infamous, it was Wagner's expressed anti-Semitism, which he expressed through his prose work, and perhaps his life is infamous because of moral failures, and not just anti-Semitism, but others as well. That, fair enough, and that I think we should say. This was a man with great faults as a human being, and that we have to acknowledge those faults, and at the same time acknowledge that his art is of such power and such magnitude that we cannot ignore it. I condemn the viewpoints that Wagner expressed when it comes to racism and anti-Semitism, but I admire his musical, dramatic, and poetic genius. And frankly, that's why we're talking about it today, because that genius was so great. I believe that it outweighs the unjust, the horrible way in which he considered himself compared to other human beings. So let's go on to the next question. Aside from sheer endurance, what aspect of the Ring cycle is most difficult for the performers? Well, I might add, maybe that's the aspect that's most difficult for the audience, endurance. We have gotten out of the habit of concentrating for many hours of the day. I should say that we as a society, attention spans have shortened to some degree in the last century, or the last half of a century. And so it may pose a problem to some people. In fact, it's the thing I hear the most about Wagner, it's so long. Now, for me, it can't be long enough because I don't feel the passage of time when I am listening to music or performing it. I see the work from beginning to end, and I know where I am and where I'm going. And so that's not a troubling aspect. In fact, I have often remarked that the feeling I have at the end of Parsifal is I feel deprived of that spiritual space that has been opened to me, to us, as we've played it, as we've listened to it. And at the moment that it stops, it's a very shocking feeling to me. Endurance, physical endurance. Let's talk about the conductor first. Is it physically demanding? Yes. Is its length a problem to that? So far, it hasn't been for me. And one of the reasons is that I find that music gives me energy and gives other people energy, so that the supply of energy necessary is provided by the very music itself. So I myself don't have an issue with endurance. Now, for the singers, that's slightly different, because some of these roles, Brünnhilde, Siegfried in particular, or Wotan, are very demanding vocally, and maintaining that high degree of physical energy and output for a long time can be difficult. So endurance there is absolutely an issue. Now, it's an issue for some roles as opposed to others in the ring, and I particularly mention Siegfried because our attitude sometimes is, if you can still be standing at the end of having sung Siegfried, you deserve to win the role, because it is so difficult. But I think that the issue of endurance is not a central issue to Wagner. What is central is one's ability to sing with a powerful voice, because it's a very large orchestra, to be able to deliver the text in a dramatic, meaningful manner, because this is music drama. That is what Wagner called that. He did not call it an opera. It is not about singers who stand up and sing and are unrelated to a dramatic context. Everything is about the drama from the very beginning. Remember that Wagner wrote the drama himself, and he started with it. He wrote the words, the texts, from the beginning himself, and he conceived the music alongside of that text and that subject. So there is no time in which there is a dominance of one or the other. They are constantly important. And so anybody singing the roles has to be conscious of that and delivering their text with their music in a way that is dramatically coherent. LA Opera's Ring cycle took place 10 years ago this summer. Can you tell us personally what that achievement meant for you, and if you have any special memories you can share? Well, the entire thing is a special memory. You don't forget your Ring cycles. My feelings about our Ring from 2010 are a combination of pride and nostalgia. It's always a very special moment when you're working on the Ring, and of course it took about 2 years from beginning to end. And so the intensity of that time and the meaning of that time is very great, and you don't forget it even 10 years later. A particular point of pride is the fact that Los Angeles had never had its own Ring, ever. Not just Los Angeles Opera, but the city of Los Angeles had never seen a Ring that was produced in Los Angeles. The only performance that could be identified or found was by a touring company, I believe in 1929 or early 1930, which apparently came and performed the Ring once. We did some research and we could not find any actual programs or proof of the performance, but we did find advertising. The advertising was at a very interesting time because it was very shortly after the stock market crash. And so we wonder how anybody afforded to do it and was able to do it at the time. Because we don't have any evidence one way or the other. The only thing we can give them the benefit of the doubt and say there was a performance of the Ring by a touring company. But Los Angeles Opera is the first company to produce it. And it is quite incredible that it took that long to happen. And therefore, we are particularly proud of it. And reviewing it in the last 2 weeks, listening again to it, writing podcasts about the Ring, or I should say, resurrecting my pre-performance talks from the time, was a very interesting moment for me to have some time of reflection and to think about, well, what did it all mean? What did it all mean to me? It was this, I had conducted the Ring 1.5 times in the past before that. The 1.5 times took place as in my years as music director of the the Cologne Opera. Why the half? Because, as very often happens, a ring was begun, Rheingold and Walküre, and then interrupted for reasons that had nothing to do with the music or Wagner or anything like that. A decision was made, well, we'll do another production. We want to make another new production. And I, being the music director of the orchestra as well as the opera company, I said, well, we're not going to stop doing the Ring. The orchestra wants it. The public needs it. The public wants it. So I decided to start all over with a concert performances of the Ring. And so then we did it complete from beginning to end. So I came to the Los Angeles Opera not only equipped with a ring and a half, plus, of course, the many, many decades as a audience member, as somebody contemplating that ring. Unforgettable moment for me, and I hope for many people who were able to be present at the time. Can I talk about how conducting and performing Wagner is different in different places? That's an interesting question. Is it different or is it not different? Well, the answer is yes and no. Let's start with no. How is it not different? As a conductor and as a performer, the essential activity that I perform doesn't change anywhere. My job, as it were, is to communicate a piece of music written by a composer and communicate that to an audience. Now, if I were giving a piano recital, I would sit at the piano. There would be me, the artist. I would touch an instrument, the piano, and communicate that to the listeners. And that would be the same for a violinist, a singer giving a recital, an oboist, a clarinetist, a trumpet player. What is different about conducting is that the conductor actually doesn't make a sound. So I am not playing an instrument, but I am playing a group of musicians. I am playing not just musicians, but human beings. They make the music. And so my first obligation is to allow them to do their best with the particular music that we're playing. So it's a little bit like a doctor, the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. Get out of the way of the music, get out of the way of the orchestra, help the orchestra do its best, and get out of the way of the music. The primary function of a performing artist is to make themselves a vehicle for the music, not the opposite, not to make the music a vehicle for themselves, a vehicle for their own virtuosity, a vehicle for their own vanity. The full power of any music, and that certainly applies to the Ring, can be felt when spiritually the performer or performers feel what the material they are playing, and they are able to give it in an egoless manner to the audience. And I'm convinced that an audience receives much more from a performance when the performers have been able to free themselves of their own ego, empty themselves, so that the spiritual experience of this music, which is attained through study, through practice, through rehearsals, through reading, through contemplation, they've been able to absorb this music in such a way that it is natural, and we are able to let it pass through us with its full power, being a positive force rather than an obstacle or a negative force. So how is it different? How is it different? That's the way it's always the same. I do the same thing no matter what music I'm conducting, in what country, with what orchestra, with what chorus, with what opera company. How is it different? I think the cultural context is a very interesting context to experience music. Now, I can start by saying that I consider my 13 years as music director of both the opera and the symphony orchestra in Cologne, Germany, to be probably one of the most formative of my life. In certain ways, I feel I learned more there than anywhere else. And one of the reasons was for the deep cultural tradition and history that the German-speaking countries can boast about, in particular, their music. And so when I went there, and in the years I was there, I conducted all of the Wagner operas, some of them quite often. I found that the very special quality was when an orchestra not only understands a text in real time, what is being said as well as what is being sung has a very special effect on the way they play that music. Now, many of those musicians grew up hearing Wagner from the time that they were children, probably before they could play their instruments as well as they do as professionals, and certainly before they would be able to understand some of the complex and complicated dramatic material in those operas. But I think having gained all of that by osmosis has a profound effect on how they actually perform that music. One of the interesting experiences I used to have is that when we're rehearsing and we stop and say, well, we have to start at number this or number that, that's the normal way of rehearsing. Sometimes all I had to say was the line, Wotan, where Wotan says this, or at the beginning of the Flying Dutchman's monologue. And they knew because they knew the text so well that they could immediately reflect on it. When you conduct the first act of Parsifal in Germany, it is almost like a religious service. And as you know, there's a tradition from Bayreuth not to applaud at the end of the first act of Parsifal. It is felt in a very spiritual way. In Germany, I felt that profoundly. In France, in Italy, in the United States, I have performed with great pleasure with some very great orchestras, but I've never had that exact experience in another country. So that is one of the ways that culture plays as a special time. And I can say in the same breath that performing Pelléas and Mélisande of Debussy, an opera that we would have produced in this time had it not been for the pandemic, playing that with the orchestra of the Paris National Opera is an experience that has never been surpassed any other place that I have ever done it. And that is because of the very specific, the specific way in which performers playing in their own culture relate to their own culture in a complete human way. Their emotions, their sensibilities, their intellects, just their very beings almost are bathed in that music. So Pelléas in Paris, Parsifal in Germany, these are some of the ways in which cultures are different. Wagner has, as a composer, has conquered the world. He is one of the most controversial individuals, and his art has always been controversial from the very beginning. And yet it is hard to escape his shadow, and his shadow is still there and to be felt in all of the arts, not just music, not just opera and music drama, but also in classical music, in theater, many innovations in poetry, in drama, and even in, sometimes in a negative way, history and politics. Wagner was an immense character in history and in art, for better, for worse. And that's one of the reasons we revisit his works as often as we do. Now, I think I've come to the end of all of these questions. I hope I have answered them in a satisfactory manner. And I didn't even take a drink of my coffee. I hope you've been having your coffee while you've been listening. And you're always welcome to come back in the future, ask me more questions, send me more questions, follow up a question we've discussed, or just think of a new one. Always happy to see you, and thank you for attending this Coffee with Conlon. I'm James Conlon.